Well, our thanks as always to Home Street Bank for their support of this podcast. If you're looking for a bank that has it all, great people, great service, great rates, this is the place for you. This is my lender of choice. It should be yours as well. Go to homestreetbank.com. It's your one-stop shop for all your banking needs, both business and personal. That's homestreetbank.com. Hey, are you smart? Oh, let me put it another way. Are you emotionally smart? That's what we'll talk about today on The Buyer's Mind.
Welcome to The Buyer's Mind, where we take a closer look deep inside your customer's decision-making mechanism to reverse engineer the perfect sales presentation. Now, please welcome your host, Jeff Shore.
Well, welcome everyone once again to The Buyer's Mind. Jeff Shore, your host here, joined by our show producer, Paul Murphy, as we talk about the way that people make purchase decisions. And as always, we take that stance that if we understand the way that a buyer wants to buy, we can reverse engineer that sales presentation to make it easy for them to do just that. That's what they want to do. Anyway, let's make it easy for them. And you know, we get some really, really smart guests on The Buyer's Mind. They challenge the way we think. And I think you're going to find that to be the case today with Dr. Art Markman. And he's going to talk about how to increase our intelligence, but he'll take us in a different direction. He is going to be talking to us about emotional intelligence. Now, Murph, before we get any further, our show producer, Paul Murphy, what do you think he's talking about when he says emotional intelligence?
You know, if I had any emotional intelligence, I'd be dangerous. It's my wife is like, do you not understand me after all these years? You'd think. But so emotional intelligence is really just understanding and connecting with somebody when you understand where their emotions are at. So for you right now, I might be frustrating you because of my stupid jokes. No. Never. I would never admit that you frustrate me, Murph. Come on. But I have to recognize that and back off a little bit and let you be the host.
No. But I'll tell you, but I think you're right. And especially as you related to the idea of how it relates to other people, that is the key, I think, to emotional intelligence. So, you know, I kind of look at it this way. I want you to think about, if you're listening right now and you're in the world of sales, I want you to try on that title called sales counselor. Some people actually carry that title, sales counselor. I know salespeople go by a lot of different names, but right now I want you to think about sales counselor and what do counselors do? What do professional counselors do? They investigate, they study, they try and get inside someone's head to understand what they're really dealing with so that they have the best chance of solving their problem. That's what professional therapists do. It sounds a whole lot like the job of a salesperson. And when they're a great counselor, they pick up on things. And I remember years ago, and I mean way years ago, 30-something years ago, going through a very, very difficult time in my life. And I remember sitting in a counselor's office working through some issues. And I was talking, and I don't remember this lady's name, but man, I remember exactly what she looked like in the office setting and everything else. We were in a small little counselor's office, and I remember she was a chain smoker. Okay, back in the day, you could get away with that. So at one point, I was talking about something, and she was just reading me. She read me so well, and at one point, she took a puff of her cigarette, and she went, "You know what, Jeff?" That's what she sounded like right after you smoke for a long time. She goes, "You know what, Jeff? That's the biggest bunch of BS I've ever heard in my life." Now, that's not what you normally expect to hear from a counselor, but she was calling me on it. And I remember saying, well, wait a minute, that wasn't very nice. Oh, well, you want to talk about nice? Being nice to yourself by telling the truth to yourself, which you're not doing right now. I'm telling you right now, I can read you like a book. Now, look, I'm overplaying this, but the fact of the matter is that she read me so well that she could tell that emotional fault that I had right there, and I was dealing with it, not being honest with myself. And it's not what I was saying, it was how I was saying that. It's about being emotionally intelligent. And so you got to ask yourself the question, how intelligent are you when it comes to your customer's emotion? The problem over and over again is that our sales presentation is so often about our sales presentation. So I'm so into what I want to talk about, my product and my features and my value advantage and my company's story. And this causes me, when I'm doing that, to miss some very, very important emotional cues. Your customer is giving you these tells, these little, it's a quick little pause. It's a abbreviated phrase in some way. And if you listen to Stephen Covey on this, what does he say? He says, most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to respond. So what's happening here? We're in the middle of a sales presentation. A customer is talking, and I'm thinking to myself, when you shut up, I've got something really valuable to say. I learned it in training. It's going to blow you away. And the whole time I'm thinking that, I am not listening, not just for the words, but I'm not listening for the emotional cues. There is nothing in me that would strike me to say, well, can we go deeper on that? Why is that the case? Tell me more about that. How do you feel that? Why do you feel that way? Tell me where that came from. Those are the moments that make the sales presentation so valuable, to be able to help a customer to get deeper into understanding their journey. So I want to make a suggestion to you. I'm going to suggest that you practice listening between the lines. Listening between the lines. And when I say practice, I'm saying practice with your spouse, with your significant other, with your kids, with the person who serves you dinner tonight. Practice listening between the lines. Strike up a conversation, chat with someone a little bit, and try and figure out what is not being said. What is being communicated without words? What is being felt? And how is that feeling being displayed to you? If you put your emotional antenna up, you end up learning things about your customer that you're not going to learn in any other way. And I've got good news for you. This is not just a good sales skill, it's a good life skill. So if you could just think about how I can practice that, how I can practice listening between the lines, it'll put you in an excellent position to be prepared to really help somebody because you know them extremely well. Well, we're joined now in the Buyer's Mind by Dr. Art Markman. He's the professor of psychology and marketing at the University of Texas at Austin, the founding director of the program and the human dimensions of organizations. He is also the co-host of a public radio show and podcast, Two Guys on Your Head. And finally, he is the best-selling author of Smart Thinking. But his latest book is Brain Briefs, Answers to the Most and Least Pressing Questions About Your Mind. So welcome to the Buyer's Mind, Dr. Art Markman. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me today.
So let me just start here, just to get a sense of what you do. You're at a cocktail party and somebody asks, what do you do for a living? Now, you could look at it and you say, well, I'm a professor, but even that is ill-defined these days. Nobody really knows what that means. So how do you describe what you actually do day in and day out?
Yeah, I study the way people think. Mm-hmm. I care a lot about how people make decisions, what motivates them. And in addition to writing papers that get read by 30 of my closest colleagues, I try to bring a lot of what my field knows outward to the people who really need it, because almost everybody I know has a mind and almost nobody knows how that mind works. And so I'm trying to help people to learn a little bit more about their minds so that they might be a little bit more effective in all the things that they do.
One of the things that we see here is that people are described in this arena as, a psychologist, as a sociologist, as a behavioral economist. Is there a nifty little moniker that works for you?
Jack of all trades. No, I'm trained as a cognitive psychologist, mm-hmm. But I also sit somewhere in between doing the science, which I do, and what you could think of as a pop scientist.
Right.
Trying to make sure that not only can I speak to the scientists, but that I can actually translate some of what we're doing outward.
This is a really interesting time to be you, because the research out there right now is in warp speed as far as what researchers are learning, and on both sides, right? Both on the psychological side and the research just in regards to how a subject matter is going to respond in a controlled environment. But then now what we can see inside the brain neuroscientifically, it's really an interesting time to be you right now.
Oh, absolutely. The field is just growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, partly behaviorally, as you point out, partly we're just learning more and more about the way that people react, think, discuss. But also we're doing a better and better job every year of connecting that down to the physiology, partly brain physiology, but partly also just physiology in general, trying to understand, well, what does it mean to have people sitting versus standing, engaging with each other face to face versus from a distance, and being able to take not just behavioral measures, but actually physiological measures as well.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You wrote the book Smart Thinking, and in it you contrast smart thinking with adequate thinking. So tell us a little bit about that. It's provocative right from the very beginning. So tell us a little bit about how you approach that.
Yeah, I think, a lot of times when we think about what it means to be smart, we assume it has something to do either with how well you did in school or maybe the score you get on some test. And I really like to point out to people that smart thinking is really that ability to take the stuff that you know and to be able to use it. And the story that I tell in Smart Thinking is this notion of merely adequate thinking, which was actually me back in high school. My first job was working at an office complex, cleaning up the office complex, and I had to vacuum the floor all the time. And so I had to solve what I affectionately call the bag problem, which means basically the bag of the vacuum would fill up and the vacuum wouldn't work so well anymore. So I'd have to empty it out. And I did that effectively each week. And as a result, I made the princely sum of $125 a month. At about the same time, though, as I like to point out, James Dyson noticed a similar problem to me, which is that vacuum cleaners don't work so well as the bag begins to fill up. But what he was able to do was to draw on his vast knowledge base, including his knowledge of sawmills, and to understand that when a sawmill sucks the sawdust out of the air, the way it separates the sawdust from the air is not with a bag or a filter, but rather with a big device called an industrial cyclone. And he had this insight. He could build a little tiny industrial cyclone inside of a home vacuum cleaner and get rid of the bag. And so he turned his smarter thinking into a $400 million a year idea as opposed to $125 a month. So I would say that's smarter thinking.
It's interesting because I think that over and over again, we see people who get labeled as being smart or maybe getting labeled as being dumb based on a fairly narrow band of criteria to be able to do that. But I remember reading Sir Ken Robinson in his book, The Element. We're asking the wrong question, especially as it relates to kids. We ask the question, how smart are you? When we ought to be asking the question, how are you smart? Because smart really takes its shape in a lot of different ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. As I like to point out, I have no earthly idea how my car works. And so when my car breaks down, I bring it to my mechanic. And historically, if you ask people, so who's smarter, the professor or the mechanic, people answer the professor. But I got to tell you, when I'm standing there at the mechanic with the car that's not working, the smart guy is not the professor. Yeah. Right. Because you have to be able to adapt to the situation you're in. And I also think that it's not just, how are you smart? It's also what can you do to continue to get smarter? Right? I think when you say how smart are you, it makes this presumption that you have a particular level of smart in you and that's going to persist over time, when actually an awful lot of your ability to improve in things gets better over time if you're willing to put the work in to read and to listen to podcasts like this one and to really try to understand the world around you and then to use that to improve your skills in the future.
Do you think that we just get to the point where, okay, that's enough? I've learned what I need to be able to function in my job or my work or whatever it is. Is it laziness? Is it just that we're on to other things or easily distracted by the television or whatever? What is the root cause of not wanting to get smarter, even in the areas where the opportunities are right there for us?
Yeah. So one of the big things is that it turns out, and let's bring the physiology into this for a second.
Sure.
The brain is an immensely hungry organ. It is 3% of your body weight. It uses 20 to 25% of your daily energy supply. And that's the amount of energy that's just required to keep the lights on, right? It doesn't matter how hard you're thinking. And so from the brain's standpoint, the less time that you spend on anything, the better. just like you'd like to spend the minimum amount of money on something you buy, your brain wants to spend the least amount of energy, which means minimizing the amount of time that it spends. And so the absolute best way to minimize the amount of time you spend on something is to do it by habit, where you remember what you're supposed to do rather than thinking about what you're supposed to do. And of course, if your habits are working well enough, then your brain is going to keep pushing you towards falling back on the strategies that have worked in the past, which means that you need to overcome that natural tendency to want to fall back on what's worked before if you're going to continue to try to improve what you're doing, to keep thinking in new ways about things that you've done adequately in the past, because you might be able to do them better in the future. And of course, a lot of people don't want to fight that. And so they just keep falling back on what they've been able to do, and they do well enough, but they can be surpassed very quickly, either as individuals or as companies, by someone who's willing to be hungry, to actually spend energy on something that they could have done by habit.
You know, it's interesting because I dwell in the sales space, and I see salespeople who fall into this trap all the time. They ask questions of their customers, even as they're getting to know them, but those questions are clearly more habit-based than strategic or based on any kind of curiosity about the person in front of them. And so you see these massive disconnects for salespeople who will ask a question, then automatically ask the next question because it's in the line, right? This is what I'm supposed to ask next. What I find interesting about that is that not only does it make for a weak sales presentation, but the salespeople themselves start feeling after a while like, man, I am bored of my own voice. I just like keep doing the same things over and over again. Is it just that pull of, well, it's comfortable and therefore we go there, even though even we know deep down there's probably more to life than the way that I'm doing things over and over again?
Yeah, you know, and let's put a slightly more positive spin on it too, which is to say one of the reasons that we fall back on things that have worked in the past is because they've worked in the past. And of course, if you go off message or if you go off script, you certainly run the risk of making a mistake, of turning off a particular client or not being as effective as you've been in the past. And so I think those people who are willing to do that kind of improvisation also have to have a certain amount of confidence that they can wrestle a situation back into a comfortable zone if they if they say something that really goes off the rails. And so, I think that for a lot of people who aren't completely confident in their abilities to manage uncertainty, sticking with the tried and true formula, at least you know what's going to happen, even if it isn't enthralling to either you or to your potential client.
It is interesting, though, because we see people who are so victimized by their habits after a while that it probably is stunting their own growth. Let me turn this, though, onto the consumer side of things. I know consumer research isn't your main forte, but I think it's very easy to interpret some of the ways that you think into this. I don't think this will be a challenge for you. When we think about making a purchase decision, I'm going to butcher a quote by Daniel Kahneman on this, but the gist of it was to say is, well, one of the key fallacies of the human mind is that we think we understand it, right? We actually think we understand the way that we make decisions. And when in fact we don't. When it comes to our consumer choices, do you see that happen? Where even for you as a consumer, you're out there, you're like, okay, there's this part of my brain that I think I know, and yet so much of it is operating on a non-conscious level.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as it turns out, I've published a couple of papers in consumer behavior journals.
Cool. Right.
So I'll jump right in on this.
Sure.
Actually, one of the things that's really fascinating is that the human motivational system drives a tremendous amount of what we like and don't like. Because if you don't care about something, that is, if you're unmotivated to relate to it, then you have no real reaction to it, right? It's only when you have some goal that is engaged by the product that you actually feel any affinity towards it or hatred towards it, right? And the thing about the human motivational system is that the motivational mechanisms in the brain are really deep in the brain. They are brain structures that human beings share with mice and rats and deer, and they're not particularly well connected to the storytelling apparatus that we have. And so what happens is we will have a reaction to a product that is based on a motivation, and we're not 100% sure where that motivation came from or what it was, but then we tell a story about it. right? So we will tell ourselves all sorts of stories about why we liked one product rather than another, why we gravitated towards a particular purchase. And we have to understand that many of those consumer choices are things that we're making for reasons that actually escape our conscious awareness, and that a lot of the stories we're telling are stories that we've made up after the fact.
You know, I describe it this way when I'm talking to sales professionals, and please, if you think I'm off base on this, I certainly want to know it. But we see something we like. There's some goal that is engaged with the product that causes us to have some affection for it. That part of our soul doesn't really have a language, right? It's not the conscious part of our brain. I liken it to say, if it did have a language, the language would be want, or hate, right? There's something, it'd be so primitive that it really wouldn't do us any good. And then we make up a story to sort of complement it. So if I'm looking at, for example, as a hockey player, if I see a really nice hockey stick, I just want. And then in my mind I say, and by the way, my wife just bought some expensive shoes. There is no specific correlation between those two things. And yet it doesn't matter. If my want is strong enough, it'll tell my brain, kick into gear and make up a story. Do you think I've got that wrong?
Oh, no, I think that's a very reasonable way of thinking about it. I would say it's sometimes want, and sometimes it's fear. That is, there's a certain amount of these motivations that actually come from the avoidance of calamity, right? But in either case, we're not sure why we did it, and then we tell that story. I think that's absolutely the case. And I think that one of the things that we have to understand about the kinds of choices that people make is that we have conflicting goals as well, which means that when we have a particular motivation that kicks in, we may then make a choice. And once we've satisfied that goal, it fades into the background a little bit, which then allows other goals to pop to the surface, which can lead to things like buyer's remorse, right? So you see that hockey stick, you buy it because you want it in that moment, and then some other thing that you also need rises back to the surface, and now you think to yourself, I probably didn't need to buy the super deluxe hockey stick. I could have bought a slightly different one and saved some money for this other thing I need, and that's where you get that sense that, well, maybe I overspent. And of course, that's the sort of thing that salespeople have to be really concerned about, because, you'd like to get people to buy as much as they can, but not more than they should, because you want them to come back to you.
Sure.
And the last thing you want is for someone to leave you and a day later think, that salesperson talked me into something that was really much more than I needed. And now I feel bad about going back to that person because really they put me in a situation where they could have looked out for my best interests a little more.
Yeah, so it falls under the seemed like a good idea at the time category there. I think we see this happen on a regular basis, and this is really helpful, I think, to our audience to try and understand what exactly is their customer going through. Because if you've studied consumer behavior as you have, then this very line of reasoning that you're bringing to us right now would explain why we're going to rely on sex appeal, for example, in marketing, because there's something very primitive about the brain, or why it's okay for me to see in a fast food commercial this hamburger that looks like it was put together by one of the top chefs of Paris, when deep down that the kid who makes it for you behind the counter is going to slap it together and it won't look anything like it does in the picture. Yet there's something that's just draws us in, even to the point where we end up fooling ourselves in order to buy something.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing is, I think in certain kinds of product categories, and food is among them, we have really optimized our ability to hit all of the things that human beings are programmed for. I mean, salt, fat, sugar. Yeah. That stuff is gold for the human motivational system, because it was rare in our evolutionary environment. Now, it's at every 7-Eleven. But that doesn't shut off the appeal of it when you see the picture of the sizzling burger, or the hot fries, or the beautiful piece of cake.
Can you talk a little bit about what you refer to as high quality knowledge? High quality knowledge. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so it turns out that the most important knowledge that people have is what you can call causal knowledge from the word cause, which is the stuff you use to answer the question why. And the reason why that causal knowledge matters so much is because that's the thing that allows you to solve a problem in a new way and not just to execute a procedure that you've learned. So, as I tell the story a lot, when I was a kid, I would go visit my grandparents and they had a big old console TV, and every once in a while the picture on the TV would get a little screwy and start moving up. And my grandfather would hoist himself off the sofa and slap the side of the television set. I'd say, well, Grandpa, why'd you do that? He'd say, I don't know. Sometimes it works, and we laugh at stories like that. But the fact is that when your computer's not working, what do? Well, you restart it, which is the 21st century equivalent of whacking the television on the side. And we do that because we don't really understand what's wrong. We just know this procedure. And if you keep restarting the computer and it doesn't fix the problem, then you got to go to somebody who actually understands the way it works, who has that causal knowledge, and allow them to really try to solve this problem in a different and better way.
It's a very, very interesting way to be able to look at that, and I think it speaks back to the same thing, that there's a mindfulness that we need to have that we often don't have when we just sort of default to, well, you know what, I learned what I really need to learn, and so I'm going to stop at that. There's a certain diligence here to what you're talking about in the way that we grow our brain and just live our life with a higher quality of thinking.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why, for example, if you're doing sales for a larger company, it's really important, and that is if you're selling to larger companies, it's really important to understand the process by which decisions are being made, so that you can really tailor the way that you're talking to people to the actual process that they're going to go through, and not just to provide generic information that isn't necessarily what it is that people want to know. And I think that's where this kind of causal knowledge is so powerful, is that if you understand why people are acting the way that they are and why organizations are acting the way they are, you can be much more effective at trying to present information in the right way, to ensure that you're presenting it to the right people, and to ensure that you're giving people the particular information that they want. Because often different people, even purchasing the very same product, may want very different information about it. And if you don't provide that information to them, they're not going to necessarily recognize the benefits of what you're trying to sell them.
Tell us about Brain Briefs. Obviously, Smart Thinking, a very important, huge book. Tell us about Brain Briefs.
Sure. So as you mentioned in the open, I do this podcast and radio show called Two Guys on Your Head. It's a conversation between my partner in crime, Bob Duke, who's another psychologist here at the University of Texas, although he's in the music department. And we talk about everything you ever wanted to know about psychology, didn't realize you were supposed to ask. And a couple of years into it, we thought, well, the show itself is a 7.5-minute segment. What if we wrote a book that was sort of in the style of the show? And so we have 40 very short chapters on topics, everything from really important things like what can you do in your life to be happier, to maybe less important things like why are kitten videos so great? And we just try to explore them in a way that's fun and somewhat conversational, and kind of a good read if you have 10 minutes at a time to pick up a book.
Sure. Yeah. Love it. We're just about out of time, but before we let you go, we're going to put you on the hot seat here just a couple minutes. We're going to a few rapid fire questions just for fun, and some rapid fire answers, and let's see how you do here. I was going to start by asking you about your first job, but you already told us that. So when you were 10, what did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
Oh gosh, at 10, probably a race car driver.
Nice. The most beautiful place you've ever stood?
Wow. Probably the Thames River overlooking right where Westminster Abbey and the House of Parliament.
Good answer. Love it. A book that you read early in your life, any book that had a long-lasting impact?
Lord of the Rings.
Oh, good. Cool. A movie you've seen several times but you would gladly see again?
Good Will Hunting.
Great movie. And your first celebrity crush?
My first celebrity crush. Wow, that's a really hard one.
This one always trips people up.
I guess if I, going way back, it'd have to be Farrah Fawcett.
There you go. I had the poster. I'm totally with you. All right, you're off the hot seat. There you go. A great conversation with Dr. Art Markman, and you can buy his book, Brain Briefs or Smart Thinking, on Amazon. You can go to smartthinkingbook.com and also subscribe to the podcast, Two Guys on Your Head. Just really, really interesting stuff, and it's just making us better at what it is that we do. Thank you for all you do, Dr. Markman, and thank you for giving us your time to help us be more effective in how we serve our customers.
My pleasure, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, Murph, there we go again, proving that the world has no shortage of really smart and interesting people.
Well, and you found him on Psychology Today, and I was really amazed as I did a little research on the guy to just see how much stuff he's doing and the brilliant stuff he's coming up with. I really enjoyed that interview.
Yeah, it was really fun to see and to be able to study myself and get that sense, and even to challenge myself. I don't know if you did this too, Murph, but I was really challenging myself with the question of, do I actively pursue high quality knowledge? And on the one hand, I think I do, even through this podcast, because we bring on some really, really smart people. And yet there's an intentionality about that says, maybe I could do a better job than that. What were you thinking?
Yeah, the example he used of Dyson, you think, wow, sawmills, who would have thought of sawmills? But, if we reach back into the experiences that we have, there are probably lots of examples that we could pull forward just for ourselves to apply and make us smarter people.
Yeah, I think so. I think sometimes we kind of look at it and say, well, we let the really smart people figure it out without thinking, maybe I'm one of them, right? That's why it impacted me so much when I first read Ken Robinson's book and dealt with the question, it's not how smart are you, it's how are you smart? And for those who have children, I think that's a very, very important concept. We tend to relegate intelligence to an IQ test, and yet kids are smart in all kinds of different ways, adults too, for that matter. But as I'm looking at it in particular, the way that this translates into the brain of our customer, which is obviously what we focus on here in the buyer's mind, there's that affirmation for me for that want, right? We see something, we love it, we say want. And so, if you're a salesperson and you're into those clues, if you're ready to pick those up, then you will see those. Unfortunately, what we tend to do as salespeople is over-respond to the logic statements that our customers make, to the stories that they tell us, even though the decision is being made deep inside the emotional, and then it's justified by a story. We respond sometimes too much to the story without really understanding the emotion that led us to that story. And I want to just encourage all of you as sales professionals right now to be aware of those subtle clues that your customer is going to give you. The pause, the soft smile, or whatever it's going to be, or perhaps it's a negative clue that you still want to know. But there are those subtle clues along the way. So if somebody, for example, is test driving a car and is looking at it and saying, I think this is big enough for our family. Now, is that a logical statement or an emotional statement? Well, that's a logical statement. I think this is big enough for our family. But what happened that led to that statement? Well, what happened here is that whoever that customer was simulating in his or her own mind, this is me driving along with my family in the car. I'm simulating what that experience is going to be like, and I have this want feeling, like I feel really good about having my family in this car. And then I make up a story. I think this is big enough to hold our family okay. Right? So it sounds highly logical, but it's rooted in something that's deeply emotional. Or if you're selling somebody a home and somebody says, I think this kitchen would be good for entertaining. Now, look, they're not talking about exactly how much counter space is out there and where everybody stands relative to the outside. This is not what they're talking about. What's happening here is they're simulating what this would be like. They're simulating that emotional experience of being very successful and happy, having all their friends over. And then what happens? It triggers that want. And then from that want, they tell a story. And the story says, yeah, I think this would be good for entertaining. So here's the idea. Your customers are going to make a lot of small little logical statements, but we are not dominated by our logical brain. So if you could dial that back and get a sense of how are you feeling about this? It's not the stats, it's not the statistics about it. It's how are you feeling about this? That's when the magic happens, when we allow our customer to get more connected, more deeply connected into their emotional brain. Too many salespeople are so full of facts and data and features and options and everything else that they forget the customer is largely making an emotional decision. And if we can lock into that emotional side, you win. And you know why you win? Because you help your customer to win. That's how we really get to make the impact. All right, well, there you have it. Another episode of The Buyer's Mind. Our thanks to Dr. Art Markman, to my friend Paul Murphy, and mostly to all of you who listen to The Buyer's Mind, whether it's on iTunes or YouTube. We just really appreciate it. If you have a chance to rate it on iTunes, that means so much to us. But until next time, you know what to do, my friends. Go out there and change someone's world.